Welcome to, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order, but before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, so this morning, I think we're starting out with Jill and the report, the annual report.
Hi, everyone. I don't have a whole lot to report. The draft report is in your packet. Let me know if you'd like me to screen share.
I guess that would be valuable if we could just, yeah.
All right. This is just the letter of transmittal to the council. Executive summary. I went ahead and created some bullet points for the executive summary as you requested after the last meeting. Just a few highlights of the big items for each committee and for the task force and the steering committee. And then it moves into the full report. Public communications, I think the Justice Project was the first one, public communications. Steering committee, evaluate the steering committee framework and mission. That one is up for approval at the June task force meeting, so I'll refine that one. And then updates on emerging issues. You'll see this on pretty much every report. And then moving into the committees, the standard introduction that's with every report. Behavioral Health Committee. Stop me anytime you have any questions or if there's anything you'd like a closer look at.
Jill, this is Stephen. I didn't get a chance to look, but Peter Fraser just joined the Behavioral Health Committee. Did you get him on the roster there?
Yeah, he wasn't a member. I can add him. He's just a new member. So he wasn't there for most of this. But yes, thanks for the reminder, Stephen. I'll add him. Crisis Stabilization Facility Committee. Thank you, Perry, for updating all the information here and giving us a graphic to include. This is great. And Index Committee is just this. There hasn't been any meetings since last year. So there's not a whole lot to report there for Index Committee. Legal and Justice.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interject real quick on the Index Committee. Sure. I apologize because had I looked at it, I could probably answer this question myself. But is there discussion in that at all about the hope the county has to hire someone to do data analysis for the criminal legal system, or is that just too ephemeral to put in a report?
I think it would be great to include in the report, but it's not something that's actually been before the task force or any of the committees so far.
Yeah.
So
okay.
As soon as we get that report, I would be thrilled to include it, and maybe it's something that Jack can touch on when he actually gives the presentation to the council about our annual report in June. But yeah, Maya, that's a great idea. It just hasn't been before the task force so far.
Yeah, and I'm not really in a position to bring it because I'm not, it's not my doing. I've just heard discussion about it. Thanks.
So
Maya, that's a great idea, and I don't want to lose that thought. If someone, whether Jill, that's you, or Maya, that's you, when I do the actual verbal, that's a real appropriate place to mention that, because the people who would be doing that are listening. So I'd be happy to do that. I just want to make sure I don't forget it.
Yeah, Chief Tank.
Yes, I just want to draw the attention to on page 4, and I know Jill passed it, but with regard to pyramid communications, somehow I would really like to see that paragraph expanded just a little bit, because I truly believe that it's been fantastic with the different outreach. And right now it's just, yeah, page 4, it's just very broad. So I don't know if it's too late to do that.
oh, are you talking about in the executive summary?
Yes. Yes.
So IPRTF public communication. So if you go down a couple more pages, or to packet page 9 right here,
Sweet.
Task force communications, that whole section is about pyramid. And I've
Awesome.
also got examples in an appendix about all the content they're developing. So
thank you, Jill.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tank, because I think it's great for us to all recognize that this is going pretty well as far as the community outreach goes. It seems to be reaching a lot of folks. My wife has been getting Facebook posts, so it's reaching a good audience.
excellent. Okay, and going back to legal and justice, bail was the last one, so we added that one, that discussion from the the May meeting, and then the joint behavioral health and legal and justice systems committees, jail reentry, competency evaluation, restoration. I think those are the two big items that are before both committees jointly, and then some alternatives, or excuse me, some other programs that have been presented.
Jill, this is Stephen again, and
Yeah.
I echo the concern about whether it's too late to change this, but the term jail reentry doesn't sound right to me.
Okay.
Sounds like you're re-entering the jail.
Yeah.
And I would just call it reentry services.
Got it. It's not too late. That's an easy fix. Thank you, Stephen. I'll make that change. And then the appendices, which include the SIM, which you as a steering committee agreed to include in every report. And then graphics from the pyramid, content, op-eds, newspaper advertising, Facebook, and then the messaging results that we've been seeing. These are as of March. But I think this is some good information to put out there to see how well the public communications is going. So
yeah, Perry.
So I'm going to tag along with some of what others had said as I read through it, and I haven't been as thorough as I want to be. Just some recommended changes in language, but I don't want to take time in this meeting to necessarily do that. For example, Jill, I don't know what your thought processes are here, but health department is referenced many times and the name has changed to health and community services. As an example, but there were some other specifics that I had, but again, I don't want to use this time necessarily to go through all those unless that's appropriate.
Jill, how would you like to receive those comments?
I think it's important to have them on the record, unless they're Scrivener's errors and typos type of comments. I can unilaterally make those kinds of changes. But I'm happy to have you go through them right quick here, Perry, just to make sure the steering committee is aware of and approves what you're recommending.
Fair enough. Stop me if I overstep. You know, I'd mentioned, and maybe we could just do a search and replace if folks are, I mean, open to that. Changing health department reference. There's multiple of them. I obviously won't go through that, but to health and community services. That transition occurred here fairly recently, so I don't know how you feel about, we're kind of talking about historic stuff, so I'm certainly open to that. I just didn't want my supervisors to say, why didn't you, reference that?
That's an appropriate change. I'm happy to do that. Thanks.
And I climbed into a couple of them, and I'm sorry, Jill, I've got it pulled up on my other computer. Let's see, the updates on emerging issues. Mine says packet page 9 that's where updates on emerging issues starts, if that's where yours is as well.
For which committee?
Let's see. It was just underneath, let's see, evaluate the steering committee's framework and mission, and then the next subheading was updates on emerging issues at the bottom of page 9.
Yes.
There's a quick comment, or a paragraph relative to competency restoration. And the first full sentence on a competency restoration work group created to find solutions to extreme delays by the state's mental health evaluation. I think it's more appropriate to say competency evaluation and restoration services. It's really not about mental health.
Okay.
It is, but you get where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And it also says then competency restoration is required, is a required mental health service. I think just striking mental health and saying service.
Okay.
And then just towards, it's a little below the middle of the paragraph. Again, it says challenges of the system include the difficulty of finding mental health providers. I think just providers.
Okay.
Is probably just, less, it's more accurate. This one, again, work group hopes to, this is towards the bottom third, I'm on the left-hand side, work group hopes to, I'd say, collaborate with North Sound Behavioral Health Administration as opposed to work with. That's, a little bit probably, yeah, just open to interpretation there. And that was all that was there. Sorry, I dove into this maybe more than was totally necessary.
No, those are great suggestions, Perry. Thank you. And that's exactly the kind of feedback I'm looking for today. So awesome.
So, thanks. And I'd like to actually bring up one other piece, and it's down under update on behavioral health crisis response programs. Let's see, it is packet number 15, I think.
Okay.
It starts out under update on behavioral health crisis response programs. The committee monitored the development of the Sheriff's Office Behavioral Health Deputy Program and the co-responder program. It sort of speaks to this a little bit later again. But this is a little bit confusing just in the sense that the co-responder program isn't the Sheriff's Office program. I'm getting into dangerous territory here, and I don't want to offend anybody. But the co-responder program is a program within the Response Systems Division, part of the Health and Community Services. So it's some of those kinds of pieces of where that particular paragraph, the way that it's written really is, it's a collaboration, of course, of the Sheriff's Office and the Response Systems Division. And so I don't have specific recommendations to that. It was just about clarification there, that being a collaboration as opposed to the sheriff's program, if that makes sense.
It does, yes.
then there's a paragraph that starts out the city of Bellingham's alternative response team, fine. And then the third paragraph speaks to the sheriff's office co-responder alternative program. You with me, Jill?
Yes, I'm here.
So a little bit of confusion there, just in terms of the alternative response program is ART program is a completely separate program from the sheriff's office. They again work collaboratively, and so the sheriff's office co-responder alternative program is mixing two programs, and it's not the sheriff's office. So again, I don't want to drag this group around into these details. Would it be helpful to just send you my highlights?
Yeah, that would be helpful. I know that there's a number of alternative crisis response programs and their names keep changing. So if you could just do a quick, almost a glossary of what they're called right now, and I can plug them into the appropriate place, that would be great. Thank you.
I am happy to do that.
Awesome.
I'll stop.
Oh, thanks, Barry. Raylene.
Thank you. Page 21 under bail. Hopefully Maya can help me with the wording here, but there's not really anything wrong with the first sentence, but I was thinking maybe we would want to add something on top of that that says a defendant may be released by personal recognizance by a judge or bail when incarcerated, because it's not just bail that they're held on sometimes. Any thoughts on that?
I need to see a screen share. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Let me screen share right quick. Okay, can you see right here at the top? This is the section that Raylene's talking about.
Can it be made any bigger?
Sure, it can.
I'm glad you're not the only one that needs it bigger.
And it's the first paragraph you're discussing, really?
Yeah. I don't want people to think that they always have to post bail.
That's true.
Sometimes right. They're released under personal recognizance, and I think that might be confusing to people.
Got it. I understand the confusion.
I think something like there's a presumption of release. So yeah, I don't know. I could think about the language and email something to you.
I'll spend a few minutes on that after the meeting today and try to come up with something a little clearer, and then email it to the two of you so you can have final approval.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Mike.
Sorry, I'm going through some of my notes here, so I didn't know we were going to do this here. I was preparing to send Jill the stuff later, but I'll go ahead and get started with a couple I have. So Jill, on packet page 16, we talk about improving data collection and just massaging the wording about the committee's role there. So committee priority for the next year is to improve data collection. We don't actually really do the data collection, right? But the committee would want to generate recommendations / requests to the appropriate data creators, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it reads a little bit like the committee's doing the data collection. And of course, that's not in our scope, but certainly we want to develop those recommendations about that. And then on the part about the RIC, and I believe that's packet page, I don't know if it's the same one. I think it's right above this, Jill. Up above, there it is, the RIC. I didn't see one of the things that we talked about in that time, and one of at least my hopes as a co-chair was partnering with the RIC either to create a booklet that could be given to folks that are re-entering the community from the criminal legal system. That would be a tangible kind of output. So I love having the data. I love it having in a system. We're wondering too, I think as a committee, can that be created into a booklet, or can there be some kind of a piece? So if we could include that in the RIC, that was one of the things that we were particularly interested in. And I had one more, but you can go to somebody else, Jill, if they're already ready. I've got one more for you if I can find it.
Any other hands raised?
Looks like you're still solo, Mike.
You're it, Mike.
Oh, I'm still flying solo. I'm not terrible. By the way, really great work on the new section, which is talking about legislative priorities. I thought you worded that really well. And I know that's a brand new section, so I really appreciate that piece. I just thought you covered that extremely well.
Thank you.
And in the begat, so I guess that's packet page 13 is where you begin in assisting the begat. The behavioral subcommittee actually had a member join that begat team. So I don't know what the best way to mention that is, but we didn't just review the model or the document as a committee. The subcommittee as a whole did do that function, but we also sent a representative, which is me, to the begat meetings. And we're really kind of integrated in that process. And I didn't see that language exactly in there. And I think those are my additions. And this is a great report, Joe.
Yeah, was that an official action of the committee, Mike, was to send a representative of the committee to begat, or was it just you're a member of both? Like, were you sent there specifically to represent the committee? I don't recall that being the case, but I could be wrong. My memory lasts about 10 minutes.
Well, mine lasts about 9, so you got me about a minute. Jill, yeah. I don't know whether that was necessarily official. Okay. I know that I think it was actually talked about more in steering that we would have a representative. I don't think the behavioral health committee, talked about it or voted me on. I think we talked about it in steering and said it made sense, and then I volunteered to do that. So
yeah, I'm happy to put something in there that says something like committee co-chair Mike Parker was also a member of the begat development.
Something like that, right?
Yep. Great, thank you. Anyone else? Wow, that's it.
Well, thanks everybody for really looking this over closely and coming up with these great edits. We'll move to the next item, which is the Justice Project.
Barry?
Yes.
Do we need a motion to recommend this for approval, Jill?
You don't need to. If the steering committee wants to officially recommend its approval to the task force, then yes, someone can make it.
I think, could we just say that we reviewed it and there was no objection from the steering committee rather than a more formal? Because my recollection, Jill, and maybe I'm still living in the past, is we tried with steering committee not to do motions unless we had to. And that's still sort of my preference.
It's up to you guys, whatever you want to do.
I can go either way on it, whatever the committee really wants. Mike, do you have a thought?
I'm fine with not having an official motion, and I think it would make sense to just say that we reviewed it and provided some input, and we're really happy with it. But yeah, I don't need to make an official motion.
Okay, Perry.
I think it's really for the task force to accept and to approve it as its output. It seems to be the most appropriate.
I'm thinking along the same lines, just because, again, there was some suggestions still. And so if we make a motion at this point, then it is what it is. And my preference would be that we still have some modification of it. So the review and recommendations really fits from my perspective.
Jack?
And philosophically, I think it's less steering if we don't approve it and recommend it, just say we have no objection, we reviewed it. And I think that kind of gives more of the decision making to the task force, which was the basis for my thinking on that.
Stephen?
I didn't remember Jack's description of an explicit approach, but it makes sense to me also, and I'm comfortable with that. My memory is about 8 minutes.
I got 7 minutes and 36 seconds. So anyway, I don't hear any objections, so we shall give them that kind of assumed consent.
So Barry, to clarify, when we're chairing the task force meeting, Stephen or I will say, steering committee reviewed this and had no objection, and now we're bringing it to you.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so we're on to the Justice Project. We're in the final dash here of getting things through. As you know, we had the town hall last week. It was very, very successful in my mind. I thought the the tone of folks testifying was really respectful. They had a lot of good ideas, a lot of there was no ranting in my view. I thought it was the testimony was, you know, really from their hearts. We had a total of about a little over 170 people, and that was split about equally between online and in the chambers. We ended up with 80 minutes of testimony, and there was 50 people that that ended up testifying. So that was a little under the 2 minutes. So people were pretty succinct. So yeah, the town hall, we taken those comments and we incorporated them into the implementation plan, which you should have seen in your inbox either this morning or last night. The implementation draft is out for review. And so we're going to be revisiting that in the task force on our task force meeting week from Monday on the 12th. So the next steps are the council has been taking a workshop role in the Justice Project beginning in the last part of April and the first part of May, and are continuing that process. Right now, for next week, we have a draft ordinance that has come from the executive's office, and we also have the implementation plan for the council's review. So that's what we'll be workshopping next week. Our timeline is to have a ordinance to introduce on June 20th, with the 2-week waiting period that puts it on the 4th for the approval, but the 4th is obviously a holiday. So the 11th is the next opportunity for the council to hold a hearing and a vote on the ordinance, and a vote will be taken in some form on the implementation plan as well, because it's heavily referenced out of the ordinance. So that's kind of where we are. We hope by July 11th, the ship will be sailing, and this thing will go to the ballot. Any questions? Tyler.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I was just going to recognize that it's my understanding too that the city of Bellingham has an agenda item on Monday and a resolution for council consideration to support the acknowledgement of the implementation plan. So I thank Bellingham for being proactive on it and having that council conversation.
Dan?
Thunder stolen by Mr. Schroeder. Thank you for those comments. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight some of the parts of the resolution. One of the whereas clauses talks about the Justice Project needs assessment implementation plan, supporting recommendations to increase access to behavioral health services, bolster reentry support services, make systems changes with local, regional, and state partners, expand supportive housing for people at risk of incarceration, build a safe and humane jail and behavioral health facilities with services to help people stay out of jail, measure and share progress for accountability and transparency. There are a number of other items within the resolution, of course, but basically you can find it at cob.org. Look under council meetings for the upcoming meeting on June 5th for a broader understanding of what we came up with.
Great, thanks for that update, Dan.
Yep.
Yeah, just a question about the handling of the emails that are coming into the task force email address. Everyone's being directed to send their comments about the implementation plan to the task force email address. And some of them are just comments about the plan, which is great. And Kathy Hawka and I have agreed that I would forward those to her so she could wrap those into the Justice Project comment section. Some of them are addressed specifically to the task force, and I feel obligated to, in addition to forwarding to Kathy, forwarding those to the task force members as well. So that's, I think, what I'm going to do, unless you all have different direction to give to me about that.
I think that sounds totally appropriate to me. Anybody have objections to that? Raylene, do you raise your hand on that subject?
I'm not objecting. I just am wondering how you would want us to treat responses. Are you wanting the task force members to respond? Do you want us to just send it to you and the two chairs if we have a response on a matter? Sometimes I know things have had to go through the attorneys before responses are sent out. So if it's going to go to the task force members, how would you like us to respond to those?
That's a really good question. In the past, all responses to citizens who have sent an email to the task force, it's just been at your own discretion for you to comment to them directly. I don't have any particular preference one way or the other, Raylene, so I don't know that I can answer that question.
Jill, do you think maybe that it would be good enough just for folks to use discretion if they see something that looks a little bit beyond the scope of what they want to deal with, they could forward it to the chairs or just something like that? I know that's kind of loose criteria, but.
Yeah, I can send an email to all the task force members just to let them know that they might be seeing more emails over the next week or two because of this request. And if they want to respond directly to the person, they can. If they have other responses that should go to the chairs, then just let us know. How does that sound?
Jill, I think that's great. My only concern and question is maybe, I mean, I'm assuming you'd be screening what would be being sent out. If you're not screening, then maybe it should only go to the chairs, because I'd be concerned about ex parte communications in cases that come from private citizens that don't understand the legal system being sent out, and some of the judges being put in very awkward positions that are on the task force.
Stephen, looked like you had a comment. Go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, I think that this is for the information of the task force members, primarily, just the way a public comment at a task force meeting would be. We don't really respond to most of those. So if there is any response, I think it should be the exception rather than the rule. I think probably it ought to come from the chairs, because that's the policy we just adopted as well for public comment at the meeting. I think we ought to set out those guidelines when we notify task force members that there will be comments coming in and available to them to see, to process for their own input on the implementation plan. But those would be my recommendations. I don't know what Jack's thoughts are.
So, Mike, did you have thoughts on this, or was it another subject?
Both. My thought on this particular subject was kind of doubling down on what Stephen said. We've recently talked about that one of the roles of steering, should there be need to have a response, you've got all your co-chairs in the room, and then we could have an agreed upon response. And this seems like a more appropriate venue to do that, because you've got all of your chairs and co-chairs in the room, and should something kind of elevate to the need of a response, or it makes sense, or we think it's important to do, we can have that conversation. And then the email is going directly to task force members, like included in a packet, if that makes sense. If that's a part of public record, it seems like a great way to notify it. And maybe that would take care of Raylene's concern too, that somebody based on their role shouldn't be directly replying. And then I have a comment, Jill. I realized I didn't answer a question on the email back to the report. So when it's okay in our agenda today, I'd like to just go back to the report briefly.
I'll come back to you as soon as we finish this subject, Mike. Jack?
And to be brief, I agreed with what Stephen said. I would also add that historically, in the rare cases where something's, quote, needed a response, I've often found it easier to pick up the phone and have a quick dialogue. That has proven, I think, more useful than back and forth emails on occasion. I think in most cases, the appropriate response is thank you for the information. And Stephen or I would bring something here if it required some kind of a consensus or opinion. And I think generally, if it's addressed to the task force and comes in that way, unless it's something simple like a statistic or a date or something, it's probably best coming from whoever speaks for the task force, which in this case is the co-chairs. But I want to stress, through the years, phone calls have proven often to diffuse or clarify things that aren't always easily understood via email.
Jill?
So I'm addressing just the next week or so, these emails that we're asking the public to send their feedback regarding the implementation plan. That's really the only set of emails that I'm talking about here. Another option is just to because Kathy is posting all of this feedback on the Justice Project webpage. Another option is to let the task force members know that this is what we're using the IPRTF email address for. If they want to see what those comments that are going to be coming in over the next week or so are, they can go to this webpage rather than forwarding it to everyone. That's another option. So,
Stephen?
Yeah, I have a slight suggested amendment to Jill's approach, and I do appreciate circumscribing the set of emails we're talking about. Rather than sort of saying, if you want to see it and having it be voluntary and individual, I would be more direct and say that this is part of the comment coming in from the public. You know, you represent the public, and in your evaluation and judgment on the implementation plan, and you ought to look at it here at the Justice Project website. So I would be more directive myself, because I think that's a set of viewpoints from the public that task force members ought to at least process, ought to be aware of, and not choose whether they want to be aware of or not.
So Jill, you have enough clarification?
I believe so, yes, thank you.
Anything else on this topic? Okay, how about the Justice Project? And then we'll come back to the report and Mike. Okay, seeing nothing more, back to the report, Mike.
Thank you, Barry. Jill, I realized that I didn't respond to an email that you sent to myself, co-chair Dan Hamill and Stephen Gockley about Courtney Taylor's comments. Real quick, I don't need to go off and read that entire thing, but I thought your synopsis, I didn't see her entire, I thought your synopsis was great, and would say, please, include that. I don't know if you need to show that, Jill, to the whole group, but just to answer your email, and also to just send a little gratitude to Courtney Taylor's comments. I think they're smart. They frequently, we didn't have a particular presenter on that issue, but it is in every single meeting that we talk about it. So I really appreciate that she brought it out. Oh, thank you for showing that.
Yeah, I agree. And for those of you who haven't read Courtney's narrative here about the importance of housing, it's fantastic. It's simply about the need for housing services. And it's important information. I just wasn't sure that her entire narrative was appropriate for this annual report. So I offered up my own little pitiful summary of what she was trying to say, and offer that up as an alternative. We can include her narrative in the annual report if we want. We can include mine, or we can include something completely different. But this is in the packet that you should have. I can give you guys a few minutes to read this as well if you like.
Okay, while folks are doing that, Dan?
Yeah, I support the synopsis or the summary that Jill Nixon created. I think it captures the spirit of what Courtney was going after.
Yeah, I go along with that as well. Anybody else? I guess make it be so, Jill, sounds like. Dan, you got something else?
Sorry about that. I'm doing my phone. Lower the hand.
I do that all the time. So, okay, so we are on to task force agenda items. Jill, what do we have? We have quite an agenda for the 12th, right?
Yeah, we do have a big agenda for the 12th. And the implementation plan, the annual report, I went ahead and sent those out to all the task force members yesterday to give them a head start and to remind them to set aside some time to read these. I will update the annual report with the changes today and resend that out. There's also the discussion of law enforcement EMS drop off at the Ann Deacon Center for Hope. I'm going to be out of the office for a couple of weeks, end of June, and I was hoping to get a little bit of a head start on the July agendas. So, chairs, if you have ideas for things that you would like on your agenda for July, please let me know sooner rather than later so I can get a head start on those before I'm out of office. Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, this is about our agenda for the June 12th meeting. And I know that the last meeting I attended, we were supposed to cover the role of the steering committee. I think my piece in that was to just do a very brief coverage. And I think we've got a synopsis of the document that would probably be in the packet. I'm unable to attend on the 12th. And so if somebody else would be willing to just introduce briefly that on my behalf, I'd be greatly in debt. I can't make that one. I made the last one and I know we didn't get to it. We had a full agenda. So my apologies again for not being there on the 12th. And if we could get a volunteer who might just preface just briefly that work, that'd be great.
Jill, I could do that during the steering committee report if you wanted to fold it up into that.
Okay, I can do that with the word role properly spelled, of course.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, Barry, I actually think we want approval of that recommended change in the role. So that's not really a committee report kind of item. It's an action item. Yeah.
Okay, so we can, do you want to just put that, Jill, then as a short agenda item and then the chairs could call for a motion? Is that how you'd prefer to do it?
Yeah, and I think you ought to be the substitute voice of that for Mike. And then maybe you can make the motion. We'll get a second and go with a vote.
Sounds good. Perry?
Yes, I wanted to ask, Jill, sorry, I don't have the agenda up in front of me, just in terms of wording for the 12th. And I was curious about a couple of things. And the reason this is coming up for me is I have the possibility of not being able to attend on the 12th. I have the opportunity of been summoned for jury duty in U.S. District Court in Seattle. So I have an opportunity to fulfill my civic duty, and so may not be available. In that event, two things, Jill, that I was hoping for. I followed up and I touched base with Councilmember Hamill on this, of inviting the providers from the Crisis Stabilization Center, Pioneer Human Services, and I think that you have their emails. We didn't get to that topic in the last meeting for the IPRTF, and I just wanted them to be available for the information, obviously in terms of response. And my understanding, I guess initially, and that's why I was asking about the agenda item, that it wasn't necessarily law enforcement, EMS, and fire that were bringing that topic of discussion. I wasn't totally clear on the topic of discussion, but I thought it was the fire department that was bringing that. And so I was just curious about the, so maybe we do have representatives from law enforcement, emergency medical services as well, and I'm not understanding it fully. So just point of clarification.
Yeah, so Dan Hamill asked that this item be scheduled on the task force agenda. And in addition to the service providers, I think Tank was going to reach out and represent the small cities law enforcement. I sent an invitation, I'm trying to remember, to the fire chiefs, a number of people in the community paramedic program. So yeah, there were several invitations that were sent out to the law enforcement and EMS community.
Dan popped up real quick. Maybe he's got a thought on that.
Yeah, this was really to try to understand utilization of the Ann Deacon Center for Hope in terms of first responders and any challenges that they were facing with regards to drop-off times for the acuity of the individual that was being dropped off, like what that criteria or those criteria were looking like. Any issues regarding not being able to drop someone off and to not use that center. So it's really just more of an evaluation coming from the first responder community.
Okay, thanks. Raylene?
Yeah, Jill, if you want to share that email that I sent you earlier today from the Ferndale.
Yeah, I went ahead and shared it with the group already. So everyone should have it in their email inbox.
So I recently went to a meeting for the stakeholders from the State Patrol, and a lot of members from law enforcement in different communities were at that. And I posed the question because I don't know if everybody's going to be able to be there or be participating. So I asked if they would send anything. The first response, and the only one that I've received so far in writing, was from Ferndale. I don't know how Chief Tanksley has done on getting responses for people to attend. But I did talk to some of the other small cities that basically, when I asked them if they were using the Ann Deacon Center for Hope, one of them, what is that? And I said, it's the Crisis Triage Center. It's by the work center. And they're like, yeah, no, we just use the hospital. We don't have time to deal with that. So I guess it was kind of saddening to see the responses and the fact that it's not working for some of the small cities right now. So I would be very interested on what some of the other EMS and departments are saying about using it and what we could do to make it better and more accessible.
Jill?
Yeah, Perry, if you want to send someone representing your division in your place to the meeting on the 12th, just let me know and I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Jill.
Jack?
Two comments. One, I think it's very hard to have the conversation without Perry there, given that he's the primary point person. Second, Dan, I am curious why this is coming to the full task force instead of starting at the Crisis Stabilization Center subcommittee. And only because that's where we always talk about the Crisis Stabilization Center. Not that it doesn't belong to the task force, but it seems in part this is an effort to understand why this isn't being utilized, get greater awareness, and if there's a problem, address it. So I'm curious why full task force versus a subcommittee.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have this live in a subcommittee, but I thought that with the amount of effort that went into the creation of this facility, the amount of time that it took, the amount of money, that would be better to have more ears in the room in terms of task force members. But you know, if we feel if it pleases the body to have you know, this being brought up in a subcommittee, that I'm fine with that. I really think that this is an important issue, and hearing from first responders that there are issues with drop-offs there, that needs to get resolved. The community has made some investments in this facility. The task force has certainly made investments in terms of time and thinking and resources. So, but I'm okay if it needs to be brought up in subcommittee. I'm not gonna die on the hill.
I was actually thinking ideally both. Like in an ideal world, I agree with you. This is really important. But I think it would have been great if that subcommittee first could have had a short discussion so they would be prepared at the full task force. I actually like the idea of the exposure at the full task force of the challenge, but I think there would have been some merit in the subcommittee having an opportunity to discuss the problem and ideally come up with some solutions. So when we're in the full task force, they could say, hey, we've talked about it, we agree. Because absolutely, there's a huge problem if people aren't aware of it and it's not being used. And I think probably it's best to just leave it on the agenda for now because it is that important. But I struggle with our subcommittee chair and Perry, who also kind of runs the thing, not being able to communicate about it because you can't be there on the 12th, right, Perry?
It's a possibility. I'll know.
Oh, the jury. Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully you're there. I think at this point, let's just leave it on. I would just think if we run into stuff with the Crisis Stabilization Center in the future, I think it's great to bring it to full task force. I would just like the subcommittee to have a chance to get a bite at the apple too.
Yeah, no. I do want to make sure that we do have representation from first responders, and it's concerning what the point that Raylene brought up, that there was some lack of awareness from small city first responders that weren't even aware of this resource. So that's my key piece, is that I want to hear from the people that this was intended to support, basically. So if those folks can make it, great. If Perry can't be there, I do think that we need to circle back on this discussion when Perry can be there, because, you know, obviously Perry, you're a key person in this whole discussion.
Arlene?
You're not going to like what I'm going to say right now, but I'm going to say it. I worked for 9 years in crisis triage. And this problem that we're talking about right now has been present from the very beginning and not corrected. It has something to do with the qualifications that are used for admission. I don't know exactly the details, but I'm telling you that it prevents people from being accepted. And this is the reason, one of the reasons, that we absolutely must have an urgent care system to accept people who need urgent care now. Because this program, as good as it is, and we always used to do good work there, is not operating the way it should. It's some kind of systemic problem. And you need to take this seriously. This is enough feedback to bring it to the whole.
Okay. Raylene?
Yeah, just a note from Chief Tanksley. He has sent out requests and he said he hasn't received any responses yet. His computer's frozen.
Oh. Dan? Excuse me, Mike?
Yeah, I'm in favor of that being there. But I know Perry's got his hand up, and to Jack's point, I believe it has been discussed in the crisis facility committee already. And I think it's kind of an ongoing nature, but it would be great. I'm not going to be at this meeting. I would love to be there if somebody does provide some context and acknowledge that it is ongoing, that this would not be the be all and end all. And obviously any comments or concerns or input from that meeting should be taken by the subcommittee and have an opportunity to work on it. But I agree. I think it's just really important, Arlene. I appreciate your passion. But I think it's so important. I think it does need to come, and I just emphatically support it being on the agenda and discussed, even if it's not conclusive. I don't think something that's been a protracted issue for so long is going to get fixed in a meeting, but people need to know that people care about it, are working on it, and that there's a lot of investment in this.
Harry?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments because it's framing it up for me a little bit. Number one, again, I've certainly, I think folks are aware that there's a systems improvement form that's an online form that any user can submit if they had a positive or a not positive experience in terms of attempting to have an individual admitted there. And I was definitely oriented towards missing that information or getting information from one specific entity and not another, and then being able to do something with it is what my interest is. So, that being in the main task force, I'm going to still approach it in the same way of, okay, what can I do? I roll up my sleeves and et cetera, bring about that change. One of the things that we run into is that the licensure and certification for the services at the Crisis Stabilization Center do limit the individuals that can be admitted. And communicating that to law enforcement, first responders, for example, is one challenge that there are limitations in terms of that level of care is something that we definitely run into and requires ongoing communication. So just using that as an example, that it is somewhat sophisticated in terms of the challenge, that I just want to make sure that it's something that I can absolutely respond to and the best way to do that. So one of the thoughts that I had was, well, if that is shared and the providers aren't hearing that, then that could be a challenge in and of itself. So those are just some of the thought processes. I want to be as effective as I possibly can be in supporting that process. And so I don't have a problem with it coming to the main task force, as opposed to we only have crisis stabilization center meetings quarterly. So that's a bit out. I suppose that we could convene a special meeting, to address this. So wanting to honor the challenge and also be effective in it is my interest.
Stephen?
Yeah, I support Jack's point that this is important enough to have on the task force agenda. I was thinking of Perry's point of how infrequently the subcommittee meets, and so number one, I think part of the importance for the task force is to understand really how urgent and dire this is. The email Raylene got makes this much starker than I had thought it was. Much deeper problem. And in the town halls and the other work on the implementation plan, I can't tell you how much distrust there is in the community that things we've done are not effective, and that government can't be trusted to do some of these reforms. And here we have sort of our flagship accomplishment of the task force in the last few years basically falling on its face, it seems, in some respects. So I really think we need to communicate in public at a task force meeting the seriousness with which we take some of these problems. My suggestion would be, rather than waiting for the next crisis stabilization subcommittee meeting, to bring that back to the next steering committee meeting and for us to strategize and give Perry any further direction we want to give him in working through some of this stuff. It seems to me we need a much more aggressive approach in communicating to law enforcement who's appropriate and who's not, in communicating to the contracted providers what they need to do and what they don't. Just sorting through some of this stuff so we can get it done and in a much more proactive way than maybe we've done before. My thoughts.
Dan?
Yeah, some other entities that I want to hear from are community paramedic, Bellingham's community paramedic program, the GRACE program, the alternate response team. All of these groups I have seen in action in the last couple of months, including the ART responding rather quickly to a decompensated individual in front of a grocery store that I had called 911 to get some medical attention, basically, and they showed up pretty quickly. I want to understand what limitations there are with ART, community paramedic, GRACE, and as well as law enforcement and general fire to bringing patients into that care center. I want to understand why a person would not be suitable for that, and what the differences are between making the choice to take someone to One Central at the hospital versus the Ann Deacon Center for Hope. Also, broadly speaking, I want to understand these issues because we theoretically will have a behavioral health crisis center coming online here within, I don't know, a couple of years, maybe 3 years, a 23-hour facility. What does that look like? How do these facilities differ? How do they interact with one another? Do they? What are the limitations on involuntary commit? I have a number of questions. So I do think that this is a big topic that needs to be addressed. We provided a $20+ million facility for contractors who may not be taking patients. And that to me is not acceptable. So I want to get to the bottom of this. I do agree with Arlene's statement that this is something that has been a long time happening in terms of law enforcement or first responders not utilizing these systems to the extent that they could. I know that the census rates for the previous center that was at the work center adjacent to it were fairly low, and then they burst up. So that there's this inconsistency in usage, and I want to understand how we can make the most of the resources that we have, given our behavioral health crisis, given our fentanyl crisis that we are now trying to address. So that's where I'm coming from. I hope that that's clear for the for the task force member or the steering committee members here today.
Thanks, Dan. Raylene?
Yes, two things. One, just to touch on to what Dan just said, I would like to see some statistics on MCOT usage. Where is it being used the most? Where are the calls being? How much is it being used outside of the city of Bellingham and the county or the small cities getting the usage? So that's kind of a separate data index topic, but I think it ties into this. The second thing I was wondering is maybe we could look at trying to put together some type of a survey and a survey for law enforcement and EMS services, as well as a survey for general public. Somebody that reached out to me recently that said that they had a person in need that had a dual diagnosis, and they thought that the Crisis Triage Center and Beacon Center for Hope was the best location. It took them a long time to convince the person to go in. They finally decided to go in there. And then they said, okay, we're going to take your phone away from you while you're here. And that spooked that person. And unfortunately, I think so many of us are dependent on our phones, having all of our information on it. And I understand there's probably reasons for them to take things away from you when you're trying to get treatment. But it was enough to turn that person away. And say, no, I can't stay here. And they ran away, and the help that they were looking for was out there. So I wonder if we don't necessarily just want to focus on the members of law enforcement and EMS, but also the general public that are using it, and see how many people know of it, how many people have tried to use it, what were the problems they had. And then just have two separate subgroups. And then once we get the responses from that, look at those in subcommittee and then bring it back to the task force. But so we can still start at the task force as a whole to let people know that we recognize there's an issue, and this is a thought that we could grow with.
Yeah, it's a broad utilization subject that we need to be looking at. Jill?
Dan, I just wanted to let you know that I sent invitations to Joe Frank, Dan McDermott, and Scott Rickman, all from City of Bellingham, I believe. So if you want to encourage them to attend the meeting on the 12th, that would be great. And I'm wondering if some sort of follow-up to the IPRTF discussion should be scheduled in both the behavioral health and legal and justice committees for July. Is that something that you all would be interested in?
And I think here it's steering too.
And steering as well, yeah.
Follow up on this topic that we're discussing right now?
Yes, and on the presentation that will be had in June. So the agenda items before the full task force in June, and then committee follow-up in July.
Yeah, I'm fine if my co-chair is okay with having a follow-up agenda item on this.
Perfect.
Jack?
I was digging through old records. All right. My background on this thing goes back to 2006 with the Substance Abuse Advisory Board and the various permutations. I think it's fair to say, I know I annoyed the crap out of Ann and probably sometimes Perry on this exact issue, because I don't know how many times I've said, if the drop-offs aren't there and we're not doing this properly, we've completely failed. Harry's smiling. And I've been hammering this the entire time. And I do think there's absolutely room for growth. The concern I have on this agenda item a little bit is this, in my understanding, started as a very legitimate concern Dan had, that the Bellingham Fire Department tried to take someone who wasn't admitted. And now we are inviting people to discuss it at the task force. If that's the case, I think the right remedy likely here is to introduce this in June, but I really think it needs a bigger discussion, because ultimately what we need are clear parameters that everybody understands of who can be accepted. You need Compass Health sitting there, you need Pioneer Health, we need the county administrator who administrates their contracts there, because I don't know, I've read the contracts, but we need the health department who administers them to be there. And then we need to have that information clear. And I don't think that's going to happen in 30 or 45 minutes at the June task force meeting, or an hour or whatever we give it. So my thought would be, depending on how this discussion goes, and this works as our topic right now is June and July, is I think it's a really important topic. And I think carrying it over to July probably makes some sense. Introduce it, talk about it, get some information. But ultimately, isn't the goal to know what the parameters are, to communicate that to law enforcement and fire, and get that in a simple do's and don'ts form? Isn't that what we're trying to achieve? And if so, I don't think that can quite happen in one meeting, but I think it's really important. As others have said, we've spent 13 million on the building, millions of dollars in the budget. And more than that, as a community plan for this for more than almost 2 decades to try to improve the services we have. So those are my thoughts on it. And I'm leaning towards Stephen when we're chairing it if it starts getting, because I just don't think we can wrap it up in 45 minutes. I don't think we can get what we need, which is clear parameters that are understood. And that if we or law enforcement have expectations that the county can't fulfill, that has to be communicated. And so those are my thoughts on this.
Jack, I'll just quickly follow up on that. I think everything you said makes sense. I'd like it if you would handle this topic on the agenda because of your background and the nuances you see that I don't. And I think framing the questions to then move it to a more productive venue to sort of dig into some of those questions and then come back is a way to keep it contained for the June 12th meeting.
Frame the questions. I agree with Arlene. We need to figure out what the problem is. Why are people being denied entry and what the standards are? That's what I think. And I also want to avoid what some may perceive as a witch hunt or getting people too defensive. I want to get into the solution of communicating what those things are and getting everybody on the same page because we're not there.
And I would just add, I think it's more than just the provider end of it or the county contract management end of it. When Raylene reports that people say the what? I mean, I just WTF. I don't know what more we need to do, but we need to do something more in the law enforcement, the drop-off community as well. So I'd just add that piece to it.
The goal was always 10 minutes. The building was designed with those things in the back to accommodate it. But I think before we educate law enforcement, EMS, part of that education is understanding what the boundaries, what the bumpers are. So once you have that, then I think you can really push hard for awareness of here's your resource.
Agreed.
Dan?
Yeah, my understanding is that law enforcement wants a 7-minute drop off, not 10. I don't know how it works with fire. I think it's a different thing. ART is probably completely different. They stayed on scene at this episode that I just barely described last week for quite some time. So I think it's just different for the different responders. But I want to understand that. And yeah, Jack, as you're kind of explaining kind of your thinking on this and how this is not going to be solved in 45 minutes at the next meeting, I totally 100% agree. And I think that's probably going to take, I don't know how many meetings, probably several to try to get this thing, sorted out. And I'm not interested in going after providers or anybody else. What I'm interested in is trying to figure out how we can utilize this resource in the best way for the patients that need it. That's really it. And so I do think that maybe having providers come to a meeting and the contract management people from presumably the health department at some meeting, and it's probably not going to be the 12th, but maybe it's the one in July. I don't know how steering wants it structured. But I do think like hearing all the voices as to, what are the issues here? Why is there an underutilization of this resource? If there is, which it appears to be the case, why is that happening? How can we correct that? That's really it. Those are my motivations. I just see that we've made such very good investments in programs like GRACE and LEAD and ART, and to some extent, MCOT was already here, but to some extent, and then community paramedicine. These are all great things that a lot of communities don't have. And here we have them, and all of them need a place to go, a place to take patients. And we pinned our hopes on Ann Deacon Center for Hope. And I want to make sure that we're just doing everything the best way possible. That's really it.
Arlene?
Yes, I finally heard today from Perry a potential reason why this is happening, which is something that's very important. You know, he's basically saying the license for this kind of entity creates limitations of who we can accept. Or it may be that the way we interpret the license's rules could be the problem, or it could be the training of the provider to the counselors of who we can take. Because I remember our interviews when somebody would come in and start to be accepted would be a very long interview, like it could have been as long as an hour. And I remember law enforcement being rejected and then taking someone to the ER, which of course is not equipped either to handle these. And the other thing that's the biggest issue here is empty beds. There should not be empty beds when there are people in need. It's appalling. So it's not deep. This is not deep, but it needs to be solved.
Raylene?
Yes, thank you. This is actually not from me. This is from Chief Tanksley. My Zoom is still down. Here are my thoughts. We need to decide when Perry will be available for the discussion. And if he's not available on June 12th, we should reschedule the first responders attending. This is so important to understand what we can do and cannot do for drop-offs. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Perry?
Is here, and obviously a very important topic, and it does make sense to me if the larger task force is used to present and sort of open the discussion of this issue, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. The work with it and understanding some of it, because of the sophistication, certainly can be challenging depending on what the goals are of this particular agenda item. I listed, for example, as we were talking here, to understand the criteria for exclusion from admission into the facility is one example. Understanding it's sort of the same thing, but why the denials for admission, in that given situation. So I just wanted to say that it's sort of understanding what's our goal. And certainly it may be multiple, but if it is, simply to say, well, we get some input from, some first responders and et cetera, have we really ended up meeting the goal? What's the next step? Where do we go from there? And that's honestly where my interest is, in how the venue is approached and, in the topic best. Maybe it gets opened up, in this one. And then, as some have suggested, that there's some specific steps that are taken from that point. And I'm really open to supporting that process as well.
Anything else on this, or in general on the task force schedule for the 12th?
I think, Barry, just so everybody's on the same page, the way I'll facilitate this is I think we'll introduce the topic, understand there will be some unanswered questions, maybe say that up front, and say there will be follow-up. I think it's a really good introduction. It's a really important issue, and I think that's how we'll handle it. And I think, Jill, it's pretty fair to say we will have some follow-up on the July meeting, because I can't imagine out of the June meeting some questions won't arise, and hopefully Tank's concerns and others, if Perry isn't there, will be addressed in the July meeting, but we can kind of gather the questions and and see where we end up.
That's great, Jack. Thank you for that feedback. It sounds like July is going to be all about continuing this discussion for the task force and its committees, which is great. And just so you're all aware, those invitations out to law enforcement and EMS have already gone out. So we'll get some good attendance from them.
So
hey, Jill,
we're going to send out reminders, right, Joe?
Sure. Yeah, I can send out reminders.
Yeah, I think we probably should, if we have, especially if we haven't got any RSVPs or commitments or anything.
Yeah, Dan said he would connect with the folks from City of Bellingham. I've already gotten confirmations from the leadership at Pioneer and Compass Health through Perry. But yes, I will definitely include them when the agenda is finalized. I'll make sure that all of those folks are receive a copy of the agenda and Zoom invitations. And if any of you have anyone else that you would like to have there at that meeting, please get me their contact information sooner rather than later.
Jill, who from BPD did you contact?
Well, Chief Mertzig is on the task force.
Okay. Okay, I'll follow up.
Stephen?
Just to put out an alternative, I'm sure all of us called for jury duty have used the opportunity to ask for an exemption from that time and be put back on the list. And I don't know if it would require a direct request from Executive Sadhu to Perry to be present for the June 12th meeting, and I don't know what federal court is like as opposed to superior or district or municipal courts, but that might be an option, Perry, if you really wanted to be available June 12th, is to say you had work requirements that conflicted with it.
Raylene?
I'm going to leave that alone because I have any problems with jurors. But on a side note, I think if we're doing this in June and July, we'll be able to punt some of the questions that we can't answer if Perry's not there to the next one. I also know summer's busy and lots of people are on vacations. So if we're inviting people from law enforcement and EMS for the June meeting and they can't make it, having them available at both meetings or making sure that those couldn't attend, have other people for the next one. I think it's going to be a 2-meeting topic anyways. So I think it's just going to be beneficial to be able to answer some of those questions that we couldn't at the June meeting and leave in July, because I think you're going to have more law enforcement that aren't going to be able to make one meeting and might make the other.
Very true. Jack?
As you're talking, Raylene, it occurs to me from a process perspective to help people with their time. Maybe we flip the agenda order, and the only way to be sure when we do this is to do it first. In other words, that way they don't have to sit there the whole meeting. So if we take this at the top of the agenda, they're not wading through things. That occurs to me, it might be a better use of time if Stephen's in agreement.
I already have them scheduled for the first thing on the agenda.
That's what I was going to say too.
Well, you're already ahead of me as usual, Jill. Thank you.
Perry?
Just really quickly, and I appreciate the thought process. Jury selection is actually tomorrow. And so it's a little late in the game for me probably to ask to be excused. I also have I feel a responsibility in terms of my civic duty, although boy, is it ever going to mess with my schedule because I have some other things that I'm supposed to be doing as well. So I'll take my laptop with me and etc. But I certainly will take responsibility to communicate with Jill relative to my hope is that I can get a sense of how rapidly we can maybe wrap up if I were selected for jury duty, and be able to sort of forecast that to a certain extent. I know that that's not always possible, but I'll certainly take responsibility to communicate to Jill and others, because I am interested in addressing this issue and earlier as opposed to later, because to Raylene's point, July could get a bit spotty in terms of attendance as well, and so just taking that into consideration. So I'll take responsibility for that.
Anything else on this subject? Okay, what about other business? Seeing none. Jill, do we have anyone that would like to testify at public comment?
Raylene, did you have something you wanted to talk to the committee about? Or do you want to
just briefly? I don't know. Did you send that out already? You're pretty quick on things. There was,
I believe so. Yeah.
Several of us that attended the Washington State Patrol stakeholders meeting about a week ago in reference to better identification, disposition records for individuals that are being arrested, whether they're being booked in jail and dispositions aren't being received. You should see a copy of the report that was included. I don't know if that's a topic that might need to go back to Legal and Justice, or if it should go to the index committee, but I don't think we want to leave that out. So if people could just kind of take a look at it and give me feedback at maybe the next meeting. They did say, you know, that there were some issues with gathering information during COVID and staffing shortages. Our numbers have gone down significantly on making sure that we had accurate disposition records. But they also said that there was funding available for individuals to assist with that, as well as to provide live scan machines for different cities and grants in the future. Thanks.
Sure. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Just kind of bring up and kind of center and lift up you know, the county's membership and the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. We have not really talked about it in a formal and official way. And I see Deputy Executive Schroeder and I see Executive Sadhu, and I'm wondering if there's any updates to the IPRTF about, you know, how might we interface best, or what is the timing looking like for our newly created Racial Equity Commission? So excited to work with wherever that might be, and just kind of an invite if there is any comments about how we might sync up, work with, have shared membership of a couple of folks, or anything that we might move that a little bit forward. As I promised you all, I'm going to be a fly and in the ointment and continually bring that up. So I don't have anything more other than a request for connection to an emerging group.
Yeah, Executive Sadhu, I think you wanted to weigh in on this.
Yes, I want to. Actually, as a matter of fact, I just assigned a committee of 5 people and 4 alternates today. And they are the application review and committee. So I have signed a contract with Chuckanut Health Foundation because they were the only respondents to be the fiscal agent for this. And I believe it is a 2-year contract, and then we will seek, and ultimately we would not want it to be a standalone organization at some point of time. And so, yes, I'm very much interested to have it seated as soon as possible. We think by summer we will have it done. And these 5 members are well-respected community members who have been chosen to be the people who will receive the applications, review the applications, make the recommendations, their reviews to the mayor and to the county executive. And the way rule is that mayor and county executive jointly will appoint these members. And there is all laid out, and how many members from where, and all this is all laid out in the previous documentation. And process is underway. Contract is already signed. So yeah. I'm more than anxious to get this thing going. And then we will connect with not only IPRTF, but several other components of our society, other nonprofits and other things, so that they get due communication in different aspects of our society, our communities, so they know that this is the place they can go to. Yeah.
Thank you so incredibly much for the update, and very timely. I'm glad that you had good news to share. That is great news, and just pass along my thanks to everybody working in that venue. I know it's hard to lift up a brand new commission. Pleased that it's happening, and that it's happening right now. And thank you again for the update, Executive Sadhu.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in real quick here with the group. I was able to attend the opioid and fentanyl summit at Lummi Nation. That was very well attended, including Councilmember Buchanan was there, as well as some other folks from the county and nonprofits. This fentanyl crisis is affecting tribal communities particularly hard. There was a lot of really frank talk about how to address some of these issues. So sort of related to that, I would like to get an update from Perry, maybe in July or August. I can't remember if we're meeting in August, but maybe in July, regarding conversations that he has had with with the Swinomish tribe, with the Dijwalich facility, their wellness facility that we went and toured probably a couple of months ago now. And if there's any update in terms of further collaborations with the Swinomish tribe, I'd like to hear that. So yeah, that's my point.
Thanks, Dan. Mike?
Sorry, Barry, I did not lower it from previously, so my apologies.
No problem, no problem. All right, let's go to public comment. Jill, is there anyone in the participant list that would like to speak?
We do have 2 attendees in our meeting today. If you'd like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon or by pressing *9 on your phone. Please do so now. And no hands are raised.
Okay, Jill and Jenna, could you please remain behind?
Yes.
We are going to adjourn.
It looks like, sorry, Barry, we have 1 hand raised. Perry?
Just super quick, sorry, Barry. Just to let you know, Dan, I have a meeting scheduled with Dijwalich actually on the 6th to meet with them to talk about that a little bit, and I'll certainly keep you included and more than happy to provide an update at the appropriate task force setting as well.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Very robust meeting. Lots of great conversation today. I appreciate you all so much. We are adjourned.